Okay, so first I will define the topic of this talk, which is quantitative social media listening. And then I will tell you why is it relevant topic right now, it's a hot topic right now, and the use cases and the activities that we are doing at Roche in this area. So I will skip the intro because Fabio has already done a good job. And I will define what QSML, quantitative social media listening, is. So it's about listening. In our case, listening to patients, listening to what they have to say. And it's important that it's just listening because we don't want to interact with them, we don't want to engage with them, we don't want to poll them or have any sort of input-output from them, because that will have legal implications in our case. We only want, as long as we are just reading what they are writing, we fall into certain legal frameworks in which we don't have to, for example, ask for a clearance, what we call IRB permit, Institutional Review Board permit. And it's about listening to social media. Not necessarily all social media. We are interested in our case to particularly forums where patients of certain type gather in discussions that are rich in detail and that can be very helpful for work. Additionally, we want to do this listening quantitatively, and we put an emphasis on the quantitative because when we started doing this work, social media listening was already established in pharma, but it was mainly used for marketing, for medical affairs, for communications, for things like brand monitoring, for identifying KOLs, key opinion leaders. And what we found is that in R&D, social media listening was not used. It was not appreciated because it was not considered to be scientifically sound. So in R&D, you have other ways to get the patient's view, the patient's opinion, to learn what they think. And those ways were interviews that were done with groups of patients. And we are talking about maybe 15, 20 patients, talking with patient associations, and also working on these patient-reported outcomes, which I'll also talk about later, which means when you have a clinical trial, you get input from the patients that are in the trial about how they feel. But social media was not established practice in R&D, and even though it has some obvious advantages that you can imagine, such as a low burden on patients, the low cost, and also the fact that we can reach a much broader set of patients that we normally wouldn't be able to. So we entered this journey to try to make social media listening acceptable or valid for research. And this is the only convoluted slide that I have here in my presentation. And this it's from a paper that was our inspiration in this journey from the Graciela Gonzalez Hernandez's lab in UPenn. And this paper in 2019 established this new paradigm of doing social media analysis, in which she was interested in analyzing a set of patients, in this case, pregnant women who had babies with birth defects. And she proposed the idea that there should be a control group of social media, pregnant women in social media who had babies that had been successful, born without any birth defects, and then compare those two groups to figure out whether any difference between the groups were significant, right? And this sounds like a simple idea, but that was the first time that somebody proposed to do this. And we had a bit of an aha moment based on that. And we proposed this vision or this pathway in which we were in a situation where most of the social media listening, or all social media listening we were doing at Roche was qualitative. But we wanted to move to a more quantitative set analysis where we, let's say, count things rather than just read things and make a subjective assessment. And beyond that, to do this kind of control analysis where we'll have a comparison between patients that are of our interest and some reference patients, the control patients. Right? So we lay out this vision in several publications. These are the three main ones. I'm talking about the strategy, about clinical aspects, and also technology. And we also try to reach out to try to shape the environment, because what one of the problems we have is that the legal environment is quite complex, and we can talk more about that. The ethical environment, the privacy laws change. So, and I'm sure you have many questions already about this. So we can talk about this later. And for example, we created this working group in the Pistoia Alliance to develop the ethics of our approaches. And the Pistoia Alliance is an association that brings together pharma companies to discuss pre-competitive topics. So topics that are interesting to all pharma companies and that they don't want to compete on these things. So this will be one topic. We also help shape the FDA regulations in this area by giving feedback and on what we thought that the way things should be done, and I will show one example of this. And we actually were lucky to win a BioIT World Innovation Practices Award based on this vision that I have described. So why is this topic important, at least in my little world of pharmaceutical R&D? Well, because it comes at a moment where the science is moving in that direction. So there's a realization that the content in social media has value for medical research. And this is demonstrated, for example, by this Wall Street Journal article from this year, talking about this for the first time. In fact, a lot of this research on social media listening for healthcare was focused on drug side effects, so adverse events that we call. And it was quite narrow, and there was all these other possibilities that were being ignored. On top of that, there are two important trends in pharmaceutical R&D that are pushing in that direction as well. One of them is called patient-centric care. And you would say, well, it's not all care patient-centric, or why haven't you done that before? Actually, patient-centric care means that you take into account the patient at every step of the process of creating a medicine, right? So the input of the patient is necessary, or it's requested. It's important for the process, and that means that we don't just listen to the doctors, for example, right? We also listen to the patients, because the doctors have a different view of the disease that the patient has. You probably have realized that before, that they are what is measured or what is considered by doctors is not exactly what's most important for you, and people talk about that in social media. So we want to listen to the patients, and we want to influence. We want to think about every part of the process of creating a medicine from the point of view of the patient. For example, how we can reduce the burden of the clinical trial, right? Or looking at the patient preferences to see where we should be developing medicines, because there is a greater unmet need from the point of view of the patient. Or, for example, how we define benefit-risk ratios of medicines, right? Is this medicine too risky for this patient? Why don't we ask the patient, right? Rather than just speculate or having this medical view. So there are many ways in which patient-centric care can influence the way we develop medicines. And this, like I said, is a current trend. The EMA just in 2022 established that we have to include we have to report all the ways in which the patients influence the way we design the clinical trials. Even before that, in the UK, already set up some guidelines in 2021 in the same direction. The FDA, in fact, has been even more specific by saying that, by recommending social media as one of the sources to do this. And this is where we actually were involved, as well as other pharmas, in shaping this guideline. And we're quite happy that the FDA include the word quantitative in its description and basically endorsed this approach, and not just a qualitative approach of reading social media. So the other trend that as I mentioned, there were two trends besides patient-centric care. The other trend is real-world data. So you may not have heard about this expression before, but you'll see that it's actually something more common that you would think, but has this funny name, real-world data, and actually a funny definition as well. So what is real-world data? So real-world data, one definition would be that it's any medicine-related information or data that it's not coming from a clinical trial. And that's the definition. And I was told by the organizers that it's mandatory for keynote speakers to mention Aquinas, and to quote Aquinas. So I'm joking. In reality, it's a coincidence that I'm also quoting Aquinas. And in this case, it's because this definition, it's quite vague, right? It's kind of what we call this negative definition, which was very used in theology, which a lot of thinkers thought, well, God is very difficult to define. We can't really define it. So we can define everything else. So God is basically the remaining, right? So that's what real-world data is. Real-world data is the clinical trial data is God. Everything else is real-world data, in a way. That means that real-world data is a lot of things. So things that are more obvious, for example, hospital records, but also things that are not, you wouldn't consider. So, for example, wearable devices that you have every day on you, or other things for like claims data that you are not aware, like insurance claims that are being used for medical research. And also, from the point of view of us, there are some of these sources that are heavily based on text, or they have a lot of text. And I just point here too. One of them is social media, right? So that's what I call real-world text. And maybe it's for this definition obviously coming from the medical area, right? Because people have been working with social media data and they never call it real-world text, just to be clear. So, as I said, you're actually quite familiar with real-world data. And this is one good thing from the pandemic, maybe a minor one, is that a lot of people have become accustomed to hear about clinical trials, how they work, even very obscure terms that people didn't know just 3 years ago now. Well, they were in the headlines, right? So everybody knows about them. And one thing that has been heavily used during the pandemic is real-world data. That means data coming, let's say, from hospitals where the patients were analyzed from the hospital records to see whether there was some factor that, for example, protected them from COVID, or whether there was some factor, or the opposite, where they were more likely to be severely affected by the disease. So from real-world data, you've probably seen lots of news about, in this case, I put 2 findings which have been confirmed. For example, association between COVID and shingles, and also a study on dexamethasone and remdesivir. These are the good examples. But real-world data, and it's used for studies that are not the gold standard, right? You probably have heard that unless it's something that is tested in a randomized clinical trial, then it's not really proven, right? And a randomized clinical trial has this familiar aspect, right? You start recruiting patients, and then you divide the patients in 2 groups. And in one patient, you do an intervention that we call, let's say you give them a new medicine. Another set of patients, let's say you give them a placebo. And then you see what happens to both groups and compare them and see whether the medicine had any effects. That's a randomized clinical trial, right? But real-world data is not used for that, at least not yet. And the idea of the real-world data is used mostly in these observational studies. That means you already have the data from the patients. It could be data from a hospital. And then you just divide them in 2 groups. Your data is divided in 2 groups. One group has some characteristic, like they took a medicine while they had COVID. The other one didn't take the medicine. And then you go and compare what happened with these 2 groups. Right? You'd say, well, it makes sense, right? Why do you have to do a randomized clinical trial if you can already do that? Well, there are a lot of methodological problems with this. For example, those 2 groups could be different in complex ways. Like some group is made up of older people, right? Therefore, they have a more adverse outcome, right? And you have to control for that. And those are things and this is an easy case to control for. But it can be much more complicated in things that are unseen. So you get results like wine is related to the risk of COVID, right? Which is completely spurious. And you get these results in the headlines of the news, and that's how you get a bad name for clinical research. And like I remember in the 2000s when like every month you would see that some fruit or some kind of meat or other sort of food was related to cancer, right? And that was just one study, probably using real-world data for it, and not a very good study. So until 2016, the view from regulatory agencies, particularly the FDA, is that these kinds of studies were were hopelessly biased, and you couldn't use them for anything serious, really. And that changed. So in 2016, they opened their minds somehow a bit, and they kind of let people know that it was okay to explore this. And then there was a boom happened. I mean, if you look at the wording, the FDA is just trying to say, let's explore this. Maybe we can do something with real-world data, with observational studies, if we do it the right way. Let's see how far we can get. And then everybody tried to got into this area. And so, but if you think about it, I mean, there was a reason for this. It's not, you say, well, if it's biased, why are you going to do this? Well, first of all, maybe we can find ways to cancel this bias, right? But the other is that you cannot do randomized clinical trials for everything. You can't. For example, you have a rare disease. There are so few patients. You can't just randomize a group of 1,000 patients because they don't exist, right? Same happens with very rare cancers. And there are other questions that are kind of secondary, and you don't want to run a randomized clinical trial just to answer minor questions. Or even there are other questions that you cannot answer until you have so many patients taking the medicine that you actually get the answer. For example, for the vaccines, right? Until you had millions of patients taking the vaccines, you couldn't find these ultra-rare side effects, right? So there are valid reasons to do these kinds of analysis, these observational studies. And these are, and there are more, in fact. There are more reasons to do it, to do them. For example, if there's a disease where there's no standard of care, why do you're not going to just let die some people, right? They control people just because you need a control. So since the FDA accepted the real-world data as a valid way to do clinical investigations, there's been a number of approvals. This is just from the first 3 years after this happened. There's a number of approvals of new indications for medicines or new diseases, or for example, of applications for rare diseases that have been happening. And more is to come because this is a growing trend. So now, after I explain this to you, I'm ready to tell you what's our vision for quantitative social media listening. We want to make the data that we extract from social media listening another type of real-world data that can be integrated with other sets of real-world data in order to help us develop medicines that are patient-centric and that are approved by regulatory agencies like the FDA. So this is the big vision for us. But how do we get there, right? So I'm going to talk a bit about our activities in terms of the methods, the algorithms that we use, and also the use cases, because I think with the use cases, you'll get a better idea of what we can do to improve the process of making medicines. And first of all, now I'm going to talk a little bit about privacy. Maybe it's not the best place, but I will address some common questions. We actually have come to these conclusions based on internal legal research. We are trying to create a more pharma-wide opinion, but at the moment, this is how we work. So we don't download any social media data from places that require password. They are protected in any way. So with this, we follow the GDPR recommendation of using data that is manifestly made public, right? So you would think that's kind of obvious, but it really requires a lot of lawyers to get to that point. So yes, the data that is online and it's somebody wrote it so that everybody can read it, you would think that's okay to use it. but actually you have to go through all the lawyers to reach that conclusion. We also do not integrate data from different sources or databases. We do not enrich data. That means we don't go to one side, get the data, then go to another side, bring it together, and then figure out that, okay, this patient who said that has this disease here says it's 45, so we can just cross all this data. We don't do that. We actually don't even infer anything. We only use data that has been openly declared, right? So we are not trying to guess, and this is interesting because a lot of people there's a lot of research on inferring information from social media, like what is the age of this person, even diagnosing a person using what they wrote in social media. We don't do any of that. It's not Cambridge Analytica, just I think that's one way to put it. And finally, we restrict the use of this data for only a few people within the company for particular use cases. It's not something that is sitting around for anyone to use. Now, the way we actually do the process of the social media listening analysis starts with gathering the data, data collection. And for that, there's the first step, which is identifying the correct sources. And this is quite a manual step, which involves identifying which forums or social media sources are more enriched for the topics we're interested in. Actually, we usually like to focus on disease-specific forums, tend to be the most useful for the questions that we have. Then in terms of if we don't have, well, we also look at the terms and conditions of each of these sites, because many are actually proprietary. They are owned by somebody. And we are careful about that. And finally, if we don't have any good sources, we also have data vendors which already have contacts with sources, and we get the data from them. For the actual process of downloading the data, we have been collaborating with two groups. One from Professor Albert Wechselbraun from University of Chur, another for Professor Fabio Rinaldi from University of Zurich and now in Dalla Mole Institute, in which we have helped develop this tool called Medmon, which allows us to just plug in all the sources that we are interested in and get back all the data all the posts, all those sources in locally. It also has, this tool, Medmon, has a number of analytics capabilities like annotation and trend analysis. But for us, the most important thing is probably just downloading the data, which is already quite complicated. Why? Because social media sites can be, you probably have seen like from this really old type of sites that look like 1995 and to others that are much more standard looking. And it's actually quite difficult when you have like a list of 20, if you have to adapt every time your algorithms to each one of these sites. So one thing that Medmon does is it has an AI component that is able to adapt to every forum. And it's able to understand this is a thread, these are individual posts, and a number of other functions so that we can get clean data from those sites. And this is not only a one-time download, but also on a regular basis. So it monitors the sites, it downloads the data, and then we can use it after it pseudonymizes the names. And it saves a lot of work from our side. So it's very helpful. So once we have the data, we have to do a number of processing steps. So from translating to annotating to information extraction, topic analysis. And I will just mention now a few of the activities that we've done in that area. So first, I want to say that I'm coming from biomedical NLP. So this is how things look to me. You have a text from a scientific article or some kind of medical text. And the challenge is to map what, let's say, a doctor or a scientist wrote to some kind of a standard vocabulary, right? And we have millions of standard vocabularies. They are very well curated. There's an amazing set of tools. But this is not how social media looks, as you probably know. In fact, the way people try to write medical concepts in everyday language, in lay language, can be very creative because obviously they have to, it's very descriptive, like for example here, tingling, right? Like electrical sensation or some other metaphorical language. And it's very difficult to capture using traditional biomedical NLP methods. You can see other examples like words like vertigo, which is not even a common word that people would use. And they may use other alternative words that kind of convey similar concepts like being dizzy. And this is the case for Parkinson's disease. For every disease, you will find that there's some certain vocabulary that people use in social media, and in particular, vocabularies that are very specific to the sites. For example, for Reddit, like the way the people describe themselves, like 33M, meaning I'm a 33-year-old male, right? And so communities develop their own language, their own expressions, and develop even, obviously, everybody has their own way to describe things. So it's a complicated topic. So one of the, for example, one activity that we have done is participate in the Biocreative 7 challenge for name entity recognition of medical medicines or names of medicines. And one interesting thing about this challenge is that it represented the real distribution of medical names in Twitter. In past research, they have looked at balanced data sets. This is somebody talked about unbalanced data sets today. Look at this one. 311 tweets had mentioned a medicine from more than 100,000. And these are patients talking, but they talk about other things in their life. So these patients are talking about things that have nothing to do with medicines. And eventually they talk about a medicine they're taking. In order for us to recognize the medicines, we have to have algorithms that are good enough that work in real examples like this one. So as you can see from this competition, the algorithms, the winners, which we were not, had pretty reasonable results, like 0.85 F measure. And it shows that you can have a decent amount of, a decent performance even for such an unbalanced set of data. Another activity in which we are working on is identifying the age of patients. And as I said, we work with declared information, so we are not trying to infer the age of anyone. So we are looking for people who say, I'm 22 years old, or something that simple. And it's so simple that no one had really worked on this, because it's just such a simple task, right? But for us, it's important. So we are organizing a challenge in calling conference focused on that in the context of the SSMM4H, this is Social Media Mining for Health workshop. And if you want to apply, if you want to participate, go ahead and sign up. We're also using a tool called IQVIA NLP, formerly called Linguatics I2E, which is a rule-based and machine learning hybrid tool that allows to have certain flexibility because it's a graphical interface to create rules mainly. And sometimes when you don't have data sets, when you have little time, you need to have this kind of hybrid approaches where you can create rules quickly and also integrate it with the other machine learning approaches that you use. Finally, I'm going to talk about the analysis part, and I'm going to do that through use cases. And they are very specific to pharma development, obviously, but maybe will help you learn a bit. I mean, it's been so theoretical up to this point. I didn't talk about any particular thing that we have done. But this will help you understand a bit more. So like I said, there are many ways in which social media can help develop a medicine. I'm going to start with an example for deciding the strategy, the disease strategy. What we call disease strategy in a pharma is that let's say, okay, first of all, what are the diseases that are relevant to us? And obviously the economic incentive is important. But there are other factors like the unmet needs, meaning other medicines that people have available. The populations that exist, whether there are subpopulations that are for which the medicine doesn't work, and we could do something for them, right? So there are many factors that we have to consider in order to say, okay, we are going to work on this disease for this type of patients. And we actually even decide we want to have this much benefit for the patient, otherwise it's not worth it. So let's say 30% better than the standard of care. That kind of detail is the one involved in this designing strategy. So we use social media to help decide the strategy for a disease called COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, in which the main symptom is breathlessness, right? The inability to breathe properly. And it's the defining symptom, although now the way it's diagnosed is a bit more complex, but until recently it was the main symptom. So what we did with social media is identify a set of patients that were quite bothered by mucus, which was considered more of a secondary symptom. And you probably have the same opinion, right? If you think these people are dying because they can't breathe, you would think that mucus, it's not that important to them, right? Many people have mucus, it's just kind of a nuisance. But it turns out that for patients who have moderate disease, that means they are kind of short of breath, but they are not so bad, in a bad situation that they have to go to the hospital. For those people, actually, mucus is a problem. And it's an issue that bothers their everyday life. And we actually help steer the strategy towards developing medicines that will be targeting particularly mucus. Moreover, we also realized, based on word embeddings, that mucus and coughing were quite related. And in fact, it's because the mucus itself is driving the coughing. So in reality, the mucus is the problem. People are coughing because they have mucus. And then that intensive coughing actually makes their life pretty miserable, right? In social environments, but also just the fact that it bothers them even sleeping, for example. So through this analysis, we saw that it actually leads to things like depression, like feeling of social exclusion, and so on. Now we'll talk about another example. This is about identifying patients or populations. It's a bit similar to the example that I have shown. In this case, we were interested in a disease called dry disease, which you may think of it more of a symptom, maybe, that has many potential causes. And it can be, for example, that you have allergies, you have an autoimmune disease, or that you went through eye surgery, which after doing this, I would not recommend to anyone. And then you have dry eyes based as a consequence of that. What we wanted to do here is to find sets of patients that we could address because they have certain commonalities and maybe also unmet needs. So there were in fact, the medicines that are available for dry disease are pretty general, just the same ones for everybody, regardless of the cause of the disease. They just give you the same solution. And the idea is, well, can we find subgroups of patients where we could actually give something more personalized because of certain characteristics? And one thing we did also in this case is to understand better the population, at least in social media, in terms of demographics. So, for example, how many females versus males. In this case, more females, which fits with the overall population of dry disease patients, and also the age distribution. And not surprisingly, the patients were skewed young in this case, although it's not always the case. So we found that there were many more young people in social media in the 20 to 39 population segment. And using this information, like the gender and the age and the cause of the dry disease, we could actually try to figure out correlations between those factors, right? So one maybe obvious a posteriori is that female patients or female people who suffer from dry disease who are female also happen to have more or these hormone-related problems as the cause of the disease, right? Or we also found that the age was a factor. That's on the right side for us for all these topics, such as whether it's a drug side effect, right? That's causing the disease. So we could see that there are these correlations which are not really established, and so that we could then define what we would do in the clinic for this disease and or a strategy in the clinic. One nice thing that we did afterwards, and it's where we wanted to be going, is to integrate this real-world data from social media with real-world data from other sources, in this case from insurance claims. So insurance claim, every time in the US when you go to a doctor, an insurance is involved in the payment, right, normally. And that insurance claim data is gathered centrally by certain companies like IBM MarketScan. And so there's this extraordinary set of data, but this data has certain limitations, even though you would think that it should be perfect. But it's not perfect because it tends to, for example, skew to older patients. There's a lot of data from Medicare in the US. This is an insurance for mainly retired people. So in the end, you don't have, the data coming from insurance claims is also not perfect in any way. So social media has limitations, other sources have limitations. What we could do is actually complement those sources, because social media was giving us a better picture of younger people, and the claims data was richer in terms of older people. Now I'm going to talk about an application of for patient-reported outcomes. Like I said, patient-reported outcomes is something that the patients report in a clinical trial. So in a clinical trial, you probably think of the results of a clinical trial like, if it's for arthritis, well, okay, is the knee looking better, like the bone density has increased or not? But there are many things from a clinical trial that are not based on something that objective, which are the things that are asked from the patients. Like patients get questionnaires, they are asked, how do you feel? In terms of, depending on the disease, for example, if it's rheumatoid arthritis, they could ask, is your knee hurting, right? What's your level of pain? This is a very important part of the trial. And it's part of what's reported at the end of the trial, whether the pain went up or down, and that the only way to measure that is to ask patients. But you need to ask the right questions. If you just ask the patient 20 questions that are not so relevant to the patient, like pain could be relevant, but maybe you are not asking the right way. It's like, is the pain not allowing you to do certain things, right? That is maybe more relevant to the patient. So what you can do with social media, and this is an example for Parkinson's disorder, is that you can try to rank the things that the patient cares about. So just by as simple as just counting how many times a patient mentioned this symptom, right? And then combine what you find with social media with other sources, for example, the scientific literature. So the first thing that you find normally is that social media is confirmatory. That means that what you find in social media, in principle, the main things are known. It's not surprise, but that's good, because that means you are going in the right direction. The other thing is that you actually learn something new, because with social media you can rank things. You don't find those rankings in the literature, like, okay, tell me what's the top 5 symptoms in terms of how they affect the patients. You won't find that. With social media you can do that. Additionally, you can introduce things in your ranking that maybe were considered, not so important, because the experts didn't think that they were a big deal. Like, for example, arm swing. For example, there's this issue with arm swing asymmetry in Parkinson's disorder, and had not been considered very seriously by our scientists. And from social media, we came back and said, like, we should look into this. Additionally, there were some symptoms that had been they have been not considered at all, because they were very rarely mentioned in the literature, but the patients were talking about them. So those are the yellow symptoms that are mentioned there, overlooked. So thanks to that, we can actually create this thing that is called a disease model. And a disease model can mean many things. In this case, a disease model is a disease model from the point of view of the patient. So the patient experience of the disease. And what is that? So we would typically find in 2 ways. One is the symptoms that the patient experiences, and the other is the impacts on their daily life. And this is actually a way to understand disease that is maybe better than just thinking about the disease itself. So how the disease changes your life, right? So if you think of arthritis, maybe your bone density is increasing, but you cannot walk to the store to go shopping. So that means the trial maybe hasn't been successful, right? It hasn't really improved your life. So with social media, we can actually learn the things that are affecting people, and then we can try to improve those things. And well, first of all, ask patients whether those things are getting better when they take their medicine or not, right? So we have to really know about the disease before we go to the patients to ask them about it. We also work in something that it's pretty interesting, but we haven't really fully developed, which is the idea that there are connections between things in the disease, that the patient experiences, but they are not conscious. So, and for example, there are things that the patients may repeat, and they don't know that they are linked, right? So maybe there are patients who will all say, oh, I have symptom A, I have symptom B. And then another patient A and B, and it turns out that it's significant, right? But the patients don't realize. They just say they have A, B, C, D, E, F symptoms. But the A, B are actually significantly correlated. And we may not have known that, right? So we can try to see those hidden connections that have been maybe missed by the patients and by the doctors. And we can do that by social media, just by the number of data points that we have. So this is just one example where we are trying to identify correlations between symptoms and impacts on daily life to see any hidden correlations. For example, the cognitive, the relationship between cognitive problems and isolation. You may not have thought about that. The fact that you have cognitive problems maybe leads patients to have a more isolated life because they feel bad about talking with other people or connecting, or it's affecting their emotional life. Then there's another area of social media listening that it's quite useful for a pharmaceutical company, which is about recruitment of patients. And that's a big part of the work, which happens, it takes a lot of efforts. And whenever we talk about social media listening, many people in a pharma company, the first thing that they ask is like, can we use this to recruit people? And the first answer is no, because like I said, it's listening. We don't try to connect people and tell them, come to our trial, right? There are companies that do that, but we are not doing that. And what we discovered is that we could contribute in this area as well, in recruitment. And we could contribute by identifying hospitals or clinics that were good for recruitment. So we would go into social media, look at mentions of hospitals and clinics, and see which ones were most mentioned. And you would say, well, how do you know that's a good place to recruit? It's mentioned. Maybe it's the Mayo Clinic, or this is just the places people know. But it turns out when you cross the data with clinical trial data, those places tend to be places where people recruit patients, where doctors are good at recruiting patients. And this is for one case of a rare disease. Rare diseases are particularly good examples of this because pharma companies, particularly large companies, they have good relationship with hospitals, and they know already for cancer, for Alzheimer's, and so on. But when it comes to rare diseases, they don't know anything, or they know very little. So one way to identify places where you could recruit patients is to look into social media and see what the rare disease patients are talking about, the places where they go, where they get diagnosed, for example. We also saw that doctors were mentioned in social media, and that there was some correlation between the fact that a doctor is mentioned in social media and that it's a doctor that works in clinical trials, not as strong as with the hospitals. But, and I think I'm running a bit out of time. But one of the interesting things maybe was that if a hospital is not mentioned in social media, then it was not a good place for us to recruit patients. It was a bit surprising. And also that maybe I'll finish there. And one last example I want to give you is the digital therapeutics. And this is probably a bit counterintuitive for you that we are working on this digital therapeutics, because normally we do medicines, right? But digital therapeutics can be used as what we call pill plus. So you take a medicine, and there's a set of things, the services that are offered to the patients on top of that, right? Because they help the patient get better. So if we give them the medicine and the service, they actually will be happier with the medicine. So we look into social media to understand Parkinson's disease patients and the way they exercise. And we realized that depending on the severity of the disease, they had different types of exercises. So in order to help them, we think about different ways to engage them with exercise, right? It could be devices, or it could be that they connect with somebody online that helps them do exercise. So this is just another application of social media. And I'm just going to finish here because I'm running out of time. But thank you so much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Raul, for the brilliant presentation, fascinating insights into the usage of social media in pharma companies. Now we have some questions in the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much for the really interesting talk. My question would be, what about spam?
Yes. Yeah, so first of all, I think the main answer is that normally, even though we use a lot of data, the final set of data that we use, we read everything of it, right? So it's not, maybe it's a few hundred patients, so it's not a huge amount at the end of the day. And so you get the feeling when something is spam or not. The second answer to that is that the identification of a spam or bots is still a developing field, and it's not so well established. And hopefully maybe in a couple of years we will be better. But we don't have any automatic way to detect spam, which can come in many ways. It could be a bot or somebody just advertising something or saying something silly, and so on. But it's a topic, yes.
Raul, I would like to understand if the language is mainly English speaking, or do you have a mix there? Because I guess you have then obviously also challenges coming from the language. And the other thing is the text still not too less? I mean, Twitter is quite limited. So is there really information where you guys said, oh, yes, we can get something out of it?
Right. For language. So we have a multinational group. So we can handle French, German, English, Spanish, Italian, which are quite important. We also been working with Chinese, and we use automatic translation. And we work with vendors. Talking about Chinese content, we can talk offline about this. It's a different world because also the legal limitations. But yes, we've been trying to work with automatic translation. It has issues because there's vocabulary, even though automatic translation is so good right now, there's vocabulary like medical names that are not so well translated because the algorithms haven't seen them. So any misspelling is a problem. And in Chinese, misspellings are really more difficult than in other languages. So because it's based on the sound, so you have to do it's a more complicated process. The second question was about the length of the text. For forums, actually, you get pretty long posts often. So they can be very rich and very descriptive. For sources like Twitter, what you have to do is, and this is a bit of a gray area, you have to do is these timelines for patients. So you can see a patient, and this is where you say, well, are you creating profiles of the patient? Not. This is just dynamic timelines that we create, where we have from a patient all the tweets, and then in one place it says, I have this disease, and then you know this is a patient for this disease, and then maybe in another tweet says, I'm taking this medication, for example, right? So that's how we do it. Yes, it's a problem. Obviously, Twitter is complicated.
So, sorry to add, but so is Reddit for you a candidate where you more prefer to go because there is much more text?
Yes, but I mean, depending on the question, Reddit may not be the right answer. But yes, Reddit is a forum, right? Like other forums, it has these properties that people write these long descriptions, and so it's rich. And yes, definitely. I mean, the other advantage is that it's very general. So if you are not focusing on a disease, you have something more of a general question that cross diseases, then you have to go to things like Reddit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Such an interesting and engaging talk. I was wondering, on the slide with different types of social media, I noticed Spotify. And I was just wondering what kind of interesting data you are harvesting
No,
from
we're
Spotify.
not using Spotify. This is just to reflect the fact that there are many social media sources, not the ones we use. But interesting, I mean, people suggest using YouTube or like other multimedia sites where people talk, right? And you have the transcripts, you can use that, right? But Spotify maybe is not the best.
Because I was really thinking this entire time. Thank you very much.
Any other question? Anybody else?
There's one here.
Yes, thank you for your talk. So, I mean, one thing that comes to mind with social media is obviously like you have certain groups that are a bit out there, like the whole anti-vax movement, and obviously like they will talk about like hypothetical side effects of whatever. Like, is that something that pops up in your research at all?
Yes, I mean, you can always find people saying silly things. Just because of the lack of information or so, but that also is interesting, right? Because it gives you the view of the patient, what they think about the medicine. In particular for the anti-vax, I would say they tend to have their own forums, maybe more in Facebook. It doesn't spill so much to other places, so that's from our experience.
Could you give us an idea about the amount of data you are collecting and analyzing per day?
I don't know about that, but we collect from Twitter a lot. I mean, so let me give you an example. So we had this in MedMon, the tool that I mentioned, we had this collection for viruses, or the viruses we were interested in, and one of them was the coronavirus family, and that was 2018. And then in 2019, exploded, and we were having more than 800,000 messages in that collection, and then we had to stop it because. But sorry, that was just. I know I'm not answering your question, but I cannot tell you. It really varies a lot depending on the question, right? Because the data source from Twitter is really the biggest. We also have worked with Weibo, Chinese social media. You are talking about can be millions of posts. In principle, millions of posts. Then obviously you filter this down, right? Because for Twitter or for Weibo, you start collecting at certain time point. You don't have maybe you have a small window of history, and then you have to stop at some point because you have too much. Well, I mean, you have to filter basically, and then that's how you go from millions of tweets or millions of Weibo messages to something more can be handled. But I know it's not a good answer, but I don't have the numbers. That's it.
Any other question? Well, if there are no other questions, I think we can conclude the session with the present for the presenter from the organizers. Special prize for his theological insights, mentioning Thomas Aquinas, from Thomas Aquinas.
Is it made here? Really? Sorry, what was you asked me something? Sorry?
And I said thanks for the theological insights.
Oh, theological. Okay, that's what I didn't get.
From Thomas Aquinas.
Right, thank you so much.
So, according to the program, we are now starting with the exhibition over there. But before we start, we wanted to take a couple of minutes for a little bit of advertisement for our association, which is organizing Swiss Text. And for this, I would like to ask the board of Swiss NLP to come to the front, which also includes you, Fabio. You were selected this year. So if you don't know Swiss NLP, it's time to get knowing it. We are organizing the Swiss Text Conference since 2 years. Before, it was hosted always at my university in Winterthur. And when we said we want to give it to Switzerland and move it around, we said it cannot be organized by one university anymore, so we need to have a vessel where it is formally located, and this is Swiss NLP. This is why Manfred Vogel and Manuela Hürlimann founded the association 2 years ago, and Simon was selected last year. Fabio, predecessor. Fabio was elected to the board this year, and we basically do 2 things. One is the Swiss Text Conference, and the second is a dialect collection that you have probably heard of in the morning and in the afternoon and yesterday, so it's a huge event. And the third thing that we are doing, yes, and you can become a member, which helps us a little bit financing the Swiss Text Conference. But what I wanted to say is the third thing that we are doing, the main thing is we give away every year an award for someone or some organization which has pushed NLP in Switzerland forward. So last year it was for the NLP meetup in Zurich, which has something like a couple of hundred participants every couple of weeks. It's a huge event, and I think it's a great event. And this year, we are giving the NLP award to an initiative which I think will push also NLP forward. It will give you access almost for free to 23 million documents from Swiss media. It includes Tamedia and NZZ, SRF, so television and radio. And we have talked about that, I think, already a couple of years ago and said, well, it would be cool to have something like this because we want to do news analytics, we want to process it, we want to know what happens in Switzerland. And when we wanted to get hands on media article, the price was somewhat ridiculous or it was impossible due to copyright reasons. And then 3 people sat together and said, we will do this, we will find a solution so that researchers can indeed get access easily via an API to, I don't say all, but almost all relevant articles in Switzerland which are published in some newspaper. And for this, I am very proud to announce that the NLP award goes to the Swiss Docs initiative. And we have here 2 representatives of the 3 which are recipients of the award. That is Noah Bubenhofer and Roberto Mesbecker. Could you please come to the front? Oder gebt ihr das? So, the initiative was founded by 3 people. The third one is Fabrizio Gilardi, also from University of Zurich, and Noah Bubenhofer from University of Zurich, and Roberto Mesbecker from the Swiss Media Database. I hope that's correct translation to English. So, congratulations. It's really cool to have this initiative. Thank you very much.
A little present for you.
Cool.
To enjoy.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Who wants to take the third one for Fabrizio?
Yeah. So this is the official award. Well, this is a bottle of wine for celebrating, and this is the official award, which you can put into your office. I think I give you also the one for Fabrizio. Yes. And just a small pitch, if you want to know more about this, there will be a poster out there, which is totally independent from the Swiss NLP award, so the jury didn't know that they handed in a poster submission, but it's cool. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay.
And with this, I hand over to Manuela, who will organize the Minute Madness.
Yes. Okay, now it's time to get a little bit mad. The purpose of this session is to show you what's going to happen in the exhibition that's going to basically start right after we conclude the madness. So we will have short presentations of the posters and the demos, and you will also see what booths are available in the foyer and the hall over there. So I would like to ask everyone who has a poster or a submission that was accepted as a poster to come forward. And the rules of the game are your slide that you submitted will be shown, and you have 1 minute at max to present it. Just talk about the main idea. Like, don't go into too many details. Just say what it's about and why it's interesting.
Demos as well.
Yes, the demos will be after.
Ah, okay. First posters.
Just the posters to not make it too crowded. And note that there are more posters than will be presented here because some of the talks also brought posters, but they will not be featured in this session. All right, so if your slide comes up, then take the button and get started.
So yeah, hello. So the title says it all. So we looked at hateful users on social media, specifically Twitter users that were identified as hate speech spreaders. We look at their timeline, we look at their network, we try to predict whether they will be hateful in the future too. Obviously, that implies a lot of ethical and other questions, so please come to our poster to talk about that. Thank you.
Hello, Extra is an Indosys project developed here at ISIN in association with two Swiss companies, Karakun and DSwiss. The goal of the project is to perform document classification and extract a different set of information from a document depending on the classification. We used several natural language processing techniques, and most of all, due to the limited amount of data available, we use transfer learning to fine-tune our models. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So SkillGym is a training simulation software for businessmen that want to improve their ability to interact with their employee. Until now, SkillGym is a point-and-click software, and in this project we wanted to improve or boost the SkillGym quality of experience with the possibility to interact with a tool with a voice-based interface. This implied a lot of challenges, mainly in the NLP fields. Thank you very much.
So pattern generation is an expensive and time-consuming task, and in order to assist the inventors and speed up the process, we propose a new prompt and multitask-based language model that can generate part of the patents, edit existing parts, or even check the coherence of a patent. If you'd like more information, please come to my poster. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andreas, and I'm here from LexOffice. LexOffice is a cloud software from Germany, and it's based on bookkeeping. So our customers are doing bookkeeping. They are small, medium businesses. It's a mandatory thing they have to do, and we want to help them in automating that process, actually. I can show you that this is a repetitive task, and to actually help our customers and solve this repetitive task, simplify it, we have a product that is up and running, and I want to show you how an NLP model at scale can generate value for a lot of customers in everyday life. And you're welcome to interact with me at the poster and discuss our solution there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I have a contribution for you that is concerned with the question of extracting the structure of tables from documents. And this is a task that is particularly difficult when you apply models, even state-of-the-art models, to unseen data. And what we have done is we have built a model with an adapted convolutional architecture that is able to make excellent predictions, as you can see there, on unseen data. And if you're curious to know how we did this, please come to our poster. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Jivor, and today we're going to present our findings on the conflict that is happening. We're going to talk about the timeline of all the events and how they correspond to the emotions that people are expressing about these. And also we're going to talk about the topics that similar users are talking about them, and some overviews about what's happening. And then we're going to explore what's the extent of the influence of bots in guiding all the conversations and the topics, and how they're central in actually the communities and the network of all the users talking about this matter. Thanks.
Hello. We want to replace self-assessment in our adaptive tasks with automated grading. Our students overestimate and underestimate themselves if they grade their own responses, and some of them don't like to do this self-assessment. So we used an algorithm to predict the grading out of the student answers in comparison with the sample answer. Now, we get also some interesting results. And in front of the poster, I'd like to discuss with some of you how we can improve the algorithm, and especially also how we can prepare the data that it works better. Thank you. Hope to see you there.
Hi, my name is Ada. The title of this paper is Fairness and Representation for Multilingual NLP. Traditionally, languages are thought of as different from one another based on grounds that are linguistic, grammatical, historical, sociological, etc., looking at you, Swiss text. And we wanted to find out why languages that are traditionally considered morphologically rich and poor are typically having lower performance than the rest. So we set out to investigate this with a 6-layer transformer. In doing so, we find that the disparity is actually not warranted. The representational relativity holds, meaning that morphological complexity only holds on the word level, and there's this word tokenization scam. To find out more and to see how our results would impact future NLP, come visit us, or if you disagree with us on morphologically hold or not hold where, we can take this right outside.
Yes, so this is now the SwissDocs at Leary presentation. 23 million media articles, 5,000 to 6,000 new articles daily, more than 250 sources. You see here some mentioned. This is SwissDocs at Leary, this database which just received the Swiss NLP award. Here you see the web interface you can use to access the database to then get really nice text, you know, this CSV tab-separated data where you can use as input in your NLP software and produce nice graphics like this one. If you need any information, please come to our poster outside.
Hello to everyone, my name is Nikita and I'm here to present my poster about English-Russian data augmentation for neural machine translation. So firstly, we generated new text from the original output with the objective of maintaining the main quality of the text. So we also so for that, we have developed 4 methods. Those are adverbs, nouns, adjectives, and mixed substitution of them. So we also have done an qualitative and quantitative analysis of that. So if you want more information, come to my poster. Thank you.
McKinsey estimates that about 14% of all workforce will have to change occupations until 2030. More than most people will also have to work remotely or will continue work remotely. Future of Work will try to extract work activities from all vacancy data that we crawled about the last 10 years and try to predict if those work activities will have value in the future according to offshoreable and automatability. I would like to discuss with you what we do in our pipeline, what we try to predict, and how we try to predict those things in our poster. Thank you.
Now, anyone whose poster wasn't on here? I don't think so. Then we can move on to the... Yours didn't... Sorry, would you just say a few words without the slide? I'm not sure now what happened.
No, that's okay. Hi, my name is Michael. As you know, we have a lot of knowledge in our heads, at least more or less. And as you also know, the nature of humans is quite lazy, so people don't like to document. So how do you get this knowledge out of our heads, basically? As you know, people like to communicate, they like to share knowledge on channels like Slack, WhatsApp, Discord, MS Teams, whatever. So for example, MS Teams now has about 270 million people. So we have developed Katie, it's a bot running in these channels, and Katie is collecting this knowledge, trying to extract it, and then making it available again. So if you're interested in how Katie works and to have a demo, please come to our poster and our demo. Thank you very much.
Now we repeat the same procedure for the demos. Ah, you were. Sorry, yes, I missed that. Okay, good match. Okay, great.
Hello, I'm Mercedes Garcia. I work at Pangeanic, and I will be presenting Pangea Masker, which is integrated in our NLP ecosystem. So this is an application to anonymize text that in the future will be also working with images. So for that, we work with name entity recognition models, regex, and dictionaries that the user can create them in the platform, as you can see on the bottom, and they can upload dictionaries with entities that they want to anonymize or they don't want to anonymize. And so in this way, you can upload documents without any personal information and share it with the ones you want. Okay. Thank you. Come, and I will show you the demo.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to invite you to the Karakun booth to show you an enterprise search platform. I would like to emphasize 3 points. First of all, platform. What we show is a general demo of a search platform, and platform because we use it to create and to provide custom solutions in different domains. The second point is the annotator pipeline. We use this architecture in order to be extensible, to allow extensibility of the solution, and to be able to switch on and off different analyzers. And the first point is what we realized through an InnoSwiss project together with SUPSI, is the third point are the machine learning models that we could integrate into the platform and that we will show during the demo. So thank you. Please come to our booth, which is the second on the left.
I'm here with Interscriber, and rather than doing transcriptions by hand, we provide you the option to simply upload audio files, which will then kick off our transcription pipeline and generate a transcript all by itself. So rather than doing it for hours on end, you just get one in the matter of minutes or seconds. And of course, they aren't always perfect, so we also provide you this extensive editor where you can do some checkups or some fixes in, for example. And we also just have a rather new prototype that is trying to tackle Swiss German. Thanks.
Okay, now in addition to the really exciting posters and demos, we also have a number of booths. Some were already mentioned. I will just show you an overview. So some of our sponsors are present with a booth. That's Karakun, D1, Contexity, UBS, Skill Gym, and Panjanic. And then the universities, SUPSI and ZHAW are present. Swiss NLP will be there. We would be happy to talk to you about what you expect from the organization. And also, as mentioned already this morning, InnoSwiss will also have a booth and is available for questions. So without further ado, we can start the exhibition. Enjoy. Sorry, I forgot that it was a demo. I think I changed it and then maybe you didn't upload the slides. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think not. Do we? Ja, worked well. Die meisten haben irgendwie so 30 Sekunden gebraucht.
Ja, ja. Ist ja okay.
Ja, nein, das ist gut. Ich meine, eine Minute ist schon fast... Die eine Minute geredet haben, das ist schon fast so lang gewesen. Stellen wir das noch ab, oder was machen wir? Wir sind nachher einfach nicht mehr.
Ja, wir können die Folien zumachen. Da das die finalen Folien sind, can you... are these slides already on the Google Drive? Probably not, because we changed them today in the morning. So can you send them back somehow?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah. Then we put them as version 1.1.
Well, this is the 1.0, because you changed the name here.
Yes, but I think we renamed them to 1.1 because we changed them. So we don't get a conflict with the names.
Because you need to publish them somewhere.
Yeah, we put them on the website.
Can you change the SUPSI logo, USI logo with the SUPSI logo?
I believe I did.
We did, but we probably...
We didn't download the new version.
I'm quite sure I changed that.
Okay, so maybe we should do it again. Okay, I will save it now.
Yeah, save it now and send us.
I took, you know why this logo was on there? It's when you had the academic partners, it was actually USI and not SUPSI, so I took these and I didn't...
Yeah, because actually USI is an academic partner.
Yeah.
This is the problem of being an English. We mixed up.
This is really complex when you come
French
from the
part
outside.
and Italian part,
it's like everything is somehow connected at
They're
somewhat
kind of the same, but
something.
not quite.
In the German-speaking part, we have just a university.
Yeah, they just have weird long names. I don't know how many times I have to say University of Applied Sciences and Arts, Northwestern Switzerland. If I go to Frank each time I got that right, I'd be a millionaire.
But that's true. That's really ridiculous names. I mean, ZHW in English, ZAHW.
Yeah, I hate that too. I just say ZHW.
But do you need it today?
No,
Okay,
just
so,
for future records.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. Let me check the dry version, but I'm quite sure I changed it.
Yeah.
Okay, then I do
Hi.
a log
Hallo.
out from here.
Mijn contact heb per mail gemaakt bezüglich Fachhochschule Graubünden. Überall wird dort, muss ich gerade nutzen, noch so zum anderen Mal sagen.
Okay.
Ja. Cool. Spannender Anlass, ja. Schön, wenn wir da sind. Und wäre lässig, wenn es klappen würde im 24 bei uns.
Ja, also ich glaube, wir müssen es nochmal besprechen. Einfach so, also nicht wegen euch, sondern einfach statt 250 Leute sind nur 100 Leute da. Das ist so eine Abwärtstendenz.
Also jetzt da im Lugano. 150 sagen Sie.
Ja. Nee, 100 waren jetzt. 100. Das ist noch anders die Hälfte vom vorletzten Mal. Das heißt, wir würden eigentlich gern überlegen, wie man viele Leute